Morning, guys. Mark Ferrasci, ProTech Dog Training, and Buddy Couchet. Babuche. Yeah, good boy. Today I wanted to kind of do a little bit of difference in the Yack session, okay? We're going to call this Evolution of a Dog Trainer and tell you a little bit about my background and my history and how I got started in this field. I grew up in a little small town in San Luis Obispo, California, in that county. I basically lived every town in that county at one time or another, going through foster care. I was put into a foster care system at 2.5 years of age, and there was a long story behind it, but I was a ward of the court. I ended up becoming a ward of the court and in the foster care system all the way till 18, until I got out of it. So I had a rough life in that regards. But at the same time, I got lucky. God gave me certain things at key certain points in my life that allowed me to get the imprints and the things that I did. One of those was religion. We won't go into that. We're talking about dog training. So when I was, one of the foster homes that I had was way out in the boonies, out in Shandon. And we had a thoroughbred agent and horse trainer that was the mother of the family, and I call her mom to this day. She's passed now, but I called her mom. She was a really good lady, and she was very Christian, and I ended up going to church and all that good stuff. So they put me way out in the boonies so I'd stay out of trouble. And it was about 11 miles out, no store, no nothing. You had to drive 11 miles to get into town. We had to bus into school, that kind of thing. Probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because she had a lot of experience with horses. She started getting us on the back of a horse and started to teach us to ride and do that sort of thing and get into the horse training aspects of things. Well, me as a young man, I thought that horses were the stupidest animals on God's green earth. I love to ride and I love to get on them, but as far as training and conditioning behaviors, they have a right side and a left side, and it's a lot of challenge to be able to get good at that. And I just never had a sense for it. I could get in the middle of the saddle, and I didn't have that ability to intuitively communicate with the animal with my body language, is what you have to have. You got to be able to have your position in the saddle just right, and your horse senses you on the top of them, and you have to learn to direct the horse through your legs and through your whole body in regards to that. Well, the difference between that and a dog and the way the dog operates is he is on the same plane as I am, and I can see his tail, I can see his ears, and I can see his eyes, and I can communicate with him. I had a God-given talent because I wasn't very good at the horses, but I was good at the dogs. And I didn't like the horses that much because I was lacking in that regards, and so I started putting all my energy into the dogs to get away from mom wanting to be to get into the saddle and be a horse trainer. And that caused me to get really heavy into my dogs. And as a young man going through the trials and tribulations that I had already, by the time I got into her home, I ended up putting a lot of energy into showing off and getting into becoming a dog trainer. And that's all I wanted. From 8 years of age, that's all I really wanted. I was reading books and getting into movies and Rin Tin Tin. And you remember Run Joe Run, the series on TV? Lassie, Rin Tin Tin, Run Joe Run, all these shows. The Doberman Gang was another one of my favorites. I think that was a little bit old, when I was a little bit older, but all these imprints caused me to really know what I wanted in life at a very young age. And because of my background with the foster care system, I didn't have much of an identity. I was trying to find myself. I didn't have a mother and a father to kick my ass, so to speak, even though she gave me a lot of love. So I ended up really wanting, that's all I cared about, was becoming a professional dog trainer. And I don't know how I got that idea in my head or whatever, but I started reading books, and back then we didn't have the internet, so I had to get into it real heavy with the books that I could find, and then I went through an evolution. That's why we're calling this series The Evolution of a Dog Trainer. I'm going to put Buddy away so I can talk to you guys and not have to get messing with him, because he's going to mess with me the whole time. He says he wants to work, come out of the kennel, and that's the first thing he wants to do is go out and work, because that's what he's used to. Yep, so we're going to put him in the kennel. I'll be right back. Hup, hup. Good boy. Kennel. That's my boy. Good. So I ended up going out and starting to do my training, and I had a little Australian Shepherd cattle dog mix, a little Aussie. And I got it given to me from a rancher that was down the way from us, and that was my first dog, and that was at 12 years of age. Quiet. Good. Me chattering and talking causes this kind of behavior in the animals. They don't understand it when your voice tone's not being directed to them and you're not interacting with them. Quiet. Good. I'll shut the gate here pretty quick. So then what ended up happening was I put a lot of energy into her, and I was reading training books and that kind of thing, and I went through an evolution with working with her, doing all kinds of the obedience, heel, sit, down, stay, and getting into that. And then as I grew, as I got a little older, and I ended up kind of went back to my dad's place, and I was a little older, junior high, and I was putting a lot of experimentation into it, because back then, think about this, we didn't have the internet. I didn't have dog trainers around me that much. I was just learning what I could do out of books and learning and understanding and sensing that I had a God-given talent for this. So I went out and I started my experimentation phase, is what I call it. My goal was to figure out how many words can a dog learn? How many hand signals can a dog do? What all can I teach her? So back then I was into, being a child, into teaching her tricks. So I taught her to roll over, taught her to crawl, taught her to limp like she was hurt. I get to give her a hand signal from 10, 15 feet back and get her to limp all the way across the parking lot or all the way across the room just with a hand signal. That was the hardest trick I taught her, and one of these days I'll tell you how I taught it to her. But she would shake. I could go like this and I'd say shake, and she would shake like she was shaking water off her back, and that's a very unusual thing to do too. And it was a little tricky to get her to do that one. I had to associate it with the bathing is what I did, and I just kind of put it in there, and pretty soon she started to understand what I meant. Australian Shepherds are very intelligent. They're like what I call to this day cutting through butter, because they're very receptive to voice tone and body language, because they have to be directed when they're dealing with the animals to herd with their owner that's way back, a long far. So they're genetic stamp, we're always talking that all the time. Aussies and cattle dogs and those types of Queens and Heelers, all that class of dogs are very receptive to voice tone and body language. They're very keen with it. So it allowed me to take that, molding that clay that you hear me always talking about, and take that and get it into the hand signals and get it into, when I got done with her, she ended up having a vocabulary, because I was logging it, believe me, of about 250 words with hand signals, okay? And my hand signals are a little unorthodox. If you go out to law enforcement, they tell you to do your hand signals with the left hand. And there's a reason for that, because their gun hand is usually always right-handed, and they want their left hand free to be, their right hand free to be able to use the gun hand, right? So they do their hand signals with the right hand. Me as a kid, I started doing my hand signals, and I came up with my own, down for out in front, and then come with my right hand this way. My down from my side is Pledge of Allegiance, and some of these are used even in the AKC show ring and some other places, but that's all conformity. A dog can learn a million different ways of customization. If you get into a service dog, as an example, you have somebody with an impairment, a physical impairment, you have to customize that dog to be able to be the best use for that person. Maybe they need the dog to be able to lay down on their left side because their left side is weak, and they need to push up and use the harness to be able to push up and get their stability. There's a lot of things that a service dog does for a customer, and a lot of that time you're doing customization for that customer and their needs within what they need in a service dog. So I took Princess and I went through my experimentation phase, is what I call it, and I was getting into how many words can a dog learn, vocabulary, voice tone, body language, and I really keenly keyed in on what a dog's all about. They are very receptive to voice tone, body language, and that sort of thing. So that being the case, even today when I work my animals, I give them a lot of help. I give a lot of, you'll hear me doing a lot of sounds, my kissy cat sounds, and good dog, my voice tone fluctuates. I like to teach my customers, and I call it the gut feeling of dog training, have the instinct to feel training. And the processes of training, the science behind it is going to be pretty rigid, but every dog is different. So when you put in your instincts to be able to work with the animal, you're going to get a lot more quality out of that animal working with a customer and working with you, because they understand what's coming at them a little bit different. So I always harness into that voice tone and body language and all that. So I got done with Princess, and I got a little older. I was going on 16 years of age. Yeah, 16, 17, somewhere in there. And being a kid, being a child, I was into things maybe shouldn't get into, and I was growing marijuana in my backyard. This is 20, 30 years ago, guys. And so I ended up having my plants ripped off. I had my Australian Shepherd. I could take her places, and I had a general guard of my bike and things like that, and I taught her what I called keep it, and I would give this little attitude like I was going to grab something, and she would growl at me, and I would reaffirm the fact that I wanted her guard. And she was pretty good at it, but she was a bluff dog, right? She was just going through the motions. And I thought that she was going to do the job and actually take someone down. I was a kid. I didn't know no different. So she was in my backyard one day, and a kid came by the back farmer's field that our house was on, and he crawled over the fence and went through her and ripped off my plants. And man, being a kid, I was pissed. I was mad. So I ended up hitting the street and putting out the rumor and everything, and we went through a whole storyline on that one. I won't tell you what happened with that. But I was upset to the point where I decided I was going to get me a German Shepherd. I was going to get me a dog that really would protect my stuff and make sure that never happened to me again. So I ended up getting a book called Guard Dog Training with William Keeler, or Kohler, I think, is the way you spell it's K-H-O-L-E-R, I do believe. And William Keeler was a Hollywood movie trainer that did a lot of dogs, and I'm not sure which ones. I'd have to go back and remember this, but he was very well known. And back then we didn't have the internet, so this is one of the main books that a lot of trainers started to follow. And he was using escape and avoidance training. We'll get into that subject one of these days and how that works. But I followed that book. I did my training off of that book, and I got myself a really good German Shepherd with some really good lines. I got lucky as a kid. There was somebody breeding, and I saw it in the paper, and I went to go check out her dog. She had a big old male. Kuno von Rittergut was the stud name, and he was out of Rittergut bloodlines here. The gentleman had a kennel in, it was a German guy, had a kennel in Long Beach, in that area, I do believe. And Seabreeze Kennel, I do believe is the name of it. But I met him 20 years later than that, long time for, not 20 years, but it was a good amount when I was out one of the backsides of one of the racetracks when I was helping my mom do hot walking of colts and stuff. I went to one of the sales and I was on the backside of Santa Anita, and he came through the shed rows one time and got to meet me. It was pretty cool. And he goes, I know that dog. And I went, what do you mean you know that dog? You know, here's this stranger walking up and he goes, that's a Rittergut bloodline. I went, how did you know that? And he was the breeder. It was really a cool interaction to get to meet the gentleman. You know, he even knew his bloodlines that well. He knew the dog. So this was out of one of the puppies, out of one of the litters. So back to Sergeant was the German Shepherd's name. I raised Sergeant and did all my obedience with him and had him working to a T. And I was pretty good at what I did, even without working with anybody, you know. And I started doing that, and I wanted to become a dog trainer. That's what I wanted. So I started going out and scouting, and there was one dog training firm in my town by the name of Canine Behavior Center. And back then, they used to do training lessons in all the parks. And that's where I saw them. I would see them out in the park giving lessons, and they did it in that county. We had, you know, towns all over the place, and they would drive everywhere. And a certain night of the week, they would be in, you know, Paso Robles, they would be in San Luis, they would be in Morro Bay, and they would give classes in these parks. So I went up and walked up there with my dog, and I started showing off, and before I knew it, I had talked myself into a job. So I started working with them and running around, but my whole emphasis and everything I wanted to do was bite work because of what happened to me before, and that's what I really wanted because I'd already had the obedience pretty wired. So they did a little bit of bite work. You know, they hit some fence lines and got the dog protecting some property and stuff, but I really didn't see them doing anything major. And so they knew that I had so much passion. And I was about 17, going on 18. I was going through high school, and I got towards graduation, and they ended up hooking me up with a training firm in the Bay Area. And I ended up getting the reference for the Bay Area, and as soon as I graduated, 18, right out of high school, I had the job already lined up at ProTrain in the Bay Area. And ProTrain ended up being one of the largest facilities in the Bay Area back in the 80s. And they ended up growing into having pet store chain with their dog training. But they had a major training firm that was right between where the Coliseum's at, and the freeways go right by there, and I can't even think of the freeways that would go by there, but they had a spot right there. And this is back in the 80s, so their agility was a little bit rough. I've seen Mark Castellera was the gentleman's name, and he's still in and around dogs. I think he sold his firm, but he's there as a consultant for him, and that's ProTrain in there up towards the Bay Area. He does a lot of service dogs because his background was San Rafael seeing eye dogs. That's what got him started. So he had a very keen ability and understanding of how they do service dogs in seeing eye dogs, and so that sticks with him today. He does a lot of the service dogs with wheelchair bound people and that sort of thing, and seeing eye and all that good stuff. It's one of his specialties, and he's very good. So I learned a lot from him, and then I came back to San Luis and I started my own business. And so I lived in the back of that kennel, and then came back to San Luis, started my own business as a kid, and went out and started doing my thing, going out to parks and all that good stuff, and slowly did my thing. And I told myself back then, and remember, I didn't have much of an education, so I told myself that if I can't make the go of this in 5 years, I'll go ahead and terminate the business and go out and get a job, and that's life, and that's what it is. So I gave it heck, but I've never really been a good businessman. I'm a dog trainer. You know, that's what I'm good at. Educating, teaching, working with people, working with my dogs. That's what I do. And so I ended up terminating that business after 5 or 6 years, and ended up starting to go through my next transition, was going to LA, and I worked for a major pet store chain and became the manager. I've always tended to do that. I always have the type that I always stretch for growing, you know, and I ended up being the manager of the pet store chain. They had like 5 or 6 different stores, and I'd go from store to store and do a lot of education of the employees. And back then, that was in the days that they could have puppies in pet stores. So there was a lot of puppy sales within their pet store. And they did order them probably from puppy mills back in the, don't know where they came from, but there was all kinds of puppies. But it's about animal husbandry and taking care of all those animals in a pet store and dealing with all that. My emphasis was on theft control, believe it or not. I was into that. So, you know, get your employees on each aisle that they need to be on and make sure you greet the customer when they come to the door so that they know that you're aware of their presence. And then cutting down on your theft by being aware and in the right places, that you deter theft. You're never going to stop it. There's always going to be some idiot that rips you off and walks out the door with something. But so that was my thing. And the big thing with the pet store aspect of things is that my mind said that I could get clients and be able to do my training through my house on my off time and be able to get a client here and there. So that's what I would always do. I'd sell myself on the side and get some dog training into my home. And about that time in LA, that's when I met Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. And how I met Caesar was between jobs with the pet store. I ended up looking around and I got a job at a firm by the name of California Canine, one of the largest facilities in the LA area. And I was basically a contract trainer. You know, they'd have 5 or 6 of us in there and we'd all come in and we'd get assigned our dogs. And I had 4 or 5 dogs, 6 dogs, however many was on your assignment. And your job was to turn out that product and then work with the customer when you were done with that. So they would sell the customer. The customer would get their dog in their facility and then I would be the one in the back room doing the dog training. You know, and then I would do the lessons and the whole 9 yards after that. Well, Caesar was one of these contract trainers. And so he was there and we got to know each other and got pretty tight. I mean, I hung with Caesar for probably 2, 3 years, 4 years, and ended up even living on his place on 163rd when he was just, before everybody even knew his name. You know, he came over the river. He tells a story about having to being a Mexican American now. He's a citizen now, but back then he had swam over the river like a lot of them do, and ended up being wanting to be a dog trainer and working his ways towards that. If you read his stuff, you get to know how he paints that picture of how he got started in the dog training field. But I just have this one segment of him when he was just before he married Illusion, and Andre wasn't even born yet, and hanging with him and then living with him. And I was around when Andre was there. That's my timestamp. I remember when Andre was born, that's when I was around Caesar. And I lived on his place on 163rd. And Caesar was really unique in regards to what he did with the pack and that pack structure. And that's something that I didn't feel comfortable with because dogs are always getting into fights and it's frowned on by society. But he has this energy that he wanted to do this pack structure. That was Caesar's whole thing and it always has been. But I got to be around that pack structure to sit back and watch the dogs interact with each other in a pack mentality. And it was really cool for me. So I would analyze all the time, be watching that pack structure and how the dogs interacted and that free flowing attitude that they did. And I could tell you a lot of stories. There's a lot of stuff that you don't see on National Geographic that he was doing back then. Not bad, not good, but I won't go into it because I feel that's kind of encroaching on his on who he is as an individual and his image to the public, and I don't want to take away from that for the big reason that Caesar I respect him. I like him. He was a friend. He was a good friend. We haven't seen each other probably in 20 years, and I have a lot of respect for the man and a lot of love for the man because I was at a real low point in my life that we hung together, and like I said, I even lived on his place on 163rd. But so I went through that transition, and then life took me, and I started going from kennel to kennel and basically scooping poop because there's always somebody that needs labor. And so I ended up going up to another lady's place that's a really well-known breeder, and I won't even mention her name. That didn't work out too well, but I got around some of the top dogs, Beaucerons and Malleys, and some of the top dogs in the industry, and got to play with that, and they were into ring sport real heavy. So I was still doing my dog training back in LA area out of my home, and doing that whole little slant after I got done with that bounce. So life, trials and tribulations. It's one of those things that's caused me to be able to go from place to place, being single and everything, where I live in the back of the kennels. I end up scooping poop and doing training and living the life that I love to live. I like to say I eat, breathe, and sleep dogs. And even to this day, right now, I'm up with my girlfriend that has a place here, and she's a breeder for 30 years. She's been doing breeding, and we have about, I won't say how many dogs, but we've got a few dogs. So I've got a full, and I love it when I'm in an environment when I'm around a lot of different dogs. So I'm one of those people that really didn't go through a training school and get a certification. There's all kinds of little side certifications that are online and education you can go through, and you can get a little thing to hang on your wall and all that stuff, but I didn't do it that way. I went out and I actually lived it. I eat, breathe, and sleep dogs, and I was kind of like the hidden secret in the back room that was actually producing the product for the firms that I worked for. Okay, and I won't go into all of them. You notice I didn't mention a couple names, but I like to mention Caesar because that was a pretty cool time. We're getting into tabletop training, and tables are a whole different thing, very controversial, and there's been a lot of people that use tables that are in law enforcement, and I could go through the history of some of these people that I know that have used tables, and that they're a very useful tool if you know what you're doing, but it's one of those tools that's so tight in how you use it that it's very important that you use it the right way. If you don't, you're going to blow a dog out of the water when you're doing the application of tables, because there's pressure involved. So tables is a whole nother issue, but I've got that under my belts as well. Me and Caesar were doing a lot of it. We went out to a couple seminars on it, and went to a guy that was out of Florida, and there's some names, and I don't want to drop names, but there's a lot of people a lot of history that I have in this little cranium of mine doing this for so many years. You know, keep in mind, this started when I was 12 years old. I'm 58 now, and I've been doing pet stores, dog training. You know, my life has bounced all over the place, but I've always had some kind of dog, and always had some kind of dog training that I've been doing within my lifestyle. So that's what I do. So my Yack session that I did the other day, when I started talking about a trainer and having somebody that's not really that positive in our industry right up the way here that I look at. He's doing a lot of videos on Instagram, and he's making himself look all sharp. And somebody gave me a message the other day on one of my little verbs and said, so-and-so is Instagram famous. You know, they were talking about Rocky, that I'd sold the dog. And I look at that and kind of laugh, because that's exactly kind of what's happening with the modern day when you got this internet. These guys are going off and showing off on film. He does a lot of these catching of the dogs, but the public doesn't know that he couldn't train his way out of a paper bag. But he's Instagram famous. I started going, give me a break. There's another guy in our area that did the same thing, took a live bite on a dog, and I won't say the name of his name again, because I don't want to end up besmirching on somebody, but I want to mention these things to make you realize that just because a person has a lot of numbers on some of these platforms doesn't make him a good trainer. And you as a civilian, you as a person that's looking for service, you need to make sure you understand that there's good and bad in every industry. And just because a guy's hanging a shingle out there and says he's a dog trainer, and you see all these numbers online, doesn't mean that he's good. Okay, so just keep it in mind, ask the right questions, and get the word of mouth. People that have already done business with him, that have had a product turned out that you can go to and say, how good was he? What did he do for you? Did he solve your problems? You know, because a lot of times people come to us with problems. You know, they're usually, most of the time it's reactivity, or it's all kinds of other things. Handler bound, we've talked about handler bound, handler dependency, we've talked about reactivity, we've talked about some of these issues that come at you that aren't just the normal. You need to really have a good instinct for how to handle a dog, because you don't know where the reactivity is coming from, and you have to kind of get in the dog's head to figure out what is the triggers that are setting this off and causing the problem. Most of the time it's a relationship problem with the dog and the owner. You know, we know that, and so I ask a lot of questions. I get to know the owner, because it's a matter of understanding that team. In other words, the owner and the dog are one thing when they get going. A lot of times, like Zeki is a good example of that. Zeki is being affected by his owners, and not their fault. I mean, they're not me. They haven't lived, eat, breathe, and sleep dogs. They don't have this instinct and this talent that I do. All I can do is try to give them as much help as I can to get them through this, and try to mold that dog with these environmental factors as best I can. Right? So when he goes back home after this session, how much is that environmental factor going to affect him to wherever he falls? You know, and in their mind, they want to, when they see a dog, they see what I'm out there showing off, Buddy and Joker, and when the people get to see my dogs, they realize that the dogs are pretty stout. You know, they're damn good dogs, and they like the same thing. Well, they're a part of this molding and shaping of the dog with their environment when the dog goes back home. So I'm affected by that, and so are they, as far as what their dog turns out like. So it's important that we try our best to get the customers to do the right thing, so we can get that animal to mold and grow into the finished product that we're after. Right? So evolution of a dog trainer, that's what I've been through in my life to get to where I am. And for you guys that are thinking about wanting to be a dog trainer, you want to become a professional, you got several routes to go. But the biggest thing that I find, and most people that are my age or maybe a little bit older or whatever, understand what I'm talking about when I say that our parents gave us these morals and these beliefs and this that has been gone. The new generation, you young guys coming up, you always want something given to you. You know, and you don't want to put the work in to earn it and to get to the point where you paid your dues. You know, I said that in that other firm. And this kid down the way is like that. You know, he went out and caught some dogs for a Schutzen guy for a couple months. You know, however long he was out there, and then all of a sudden hangs out a shingle and thinks he knows what he's doing. In reality, the guy that's doing the Schutzen classes needs meat. I call it meat, meaning young guys that you want to train, but you need somebody to be able to do your decoy work as you get older, and you're not not physically able to do it as much, right? But a lot of times you don't want to give away all the secrets, and you don't want to teach this guy to be a trainer to the degree that I would want to do. You don't want to do that, because then they just go out and hang out a shingle, and now they're your competition. So a lot of these guys will do this, and they'll give just enough to be able to get the kid to do the job that he needs to have done to catch the dog, but they don't give him the knowledge to really understand how to train the dogs. And so that's what this guy did. He went through a certification for ring sport, went out and started catching dogs, and his Instagram's all about catching dogs, and that's all you see. You don't see him working a dog. You don't see him actually taking a dog from start to finish, right? And finishing off that product, right? He's got one dog that works really well, and the dog is all that and then some, and he's all over Instagram with that dog, and it's because he's out there trying to play on the fact of perception. He doesn't really say it so much. I don't think if he does, maybe he has. But is he saying that he trained that dog from a baby and he's the one that did the training? If he did, he's lying. Okay? So reality and truth is that, you know, when I sold him the dog, I knew dang well that he could do what I taught him, which is I showed him how to work the dog and made sure I gave him that service. But in the same regards, he's not the one that did that, what they call the baseboard, right? The baseboard and the start of that, the foundation. The foundation of that dog is me. I don't think there's a behavior that I've seen him do that he's taught on his own. So it is what it is. But I want you to understand, as a civilian looking for services, make sure you do your R&D and make sure that that person really knows what they're doing and has some instinct behind it, and has some accreditation, some time under their belt that can say that they know what they're doing, right? And so buyer beware. I mean, do your homework, right? Like I said, there's good and bad in every industry, and there's people out there that'll just hang up a shingle because they can get away with it. There's no licensing in regards to saying I'm a professional trainer, right? Sure, you want to work for that accreditation, you want to get those things on your wall. Michael Ellis has a great school up here in San Francisco area, Santa Rosa. And there's some other ones, but they're very costly. They're very expensive. So if you have your parents behind you and can bankroll you and get you into it, great. Or if you can get a grant somewhere, sometimes I think those are available as well. But even though you go through a school like that, you may come away and really not have that much instinct in working the animal. It's all book learning, and you think you know what you're doing, and you go out and you start realizing that no, you need to even go further, you know, with your learning. It never stops. You never stop learning and growing, right? So for you young guys, I would highly suggest, even if you went through a school, go mentor with somebody. Well, the school gives you a lot of that, but when you go through this, you need to learn animal husbandry. You need to learn the management of the animals as far as the kennel and keeping it clean and medication. I mean, I used to have med sheets that I'd come in every morning. You go in and you got to medicate the dogs, you got to feed the dogs, you got to do all these things that it takes required to take care of those animals. So you need to learn that, right? And me, I eat, breathe, and sleep dogs. I've lived in the back of many kennels, and I understand exactly what that's all about. You know, it's a lifestyle that I've had for many years. I wake up this morning, I got 4 or 5 dogs. I've got in crates. I got Joker in my trailer. I go out here and I do a potty break with each one of those dogs, get them situated, and then I go to the back and I start scooping stuff, and I start spraying it down and taking care of the animals, checking on their health and making sure they're doing okay. And then I can come out here and do these little videos, and that's kind of what I've been doing. Come out here and doing the videos afterwards and talking to you guys and training my dogs before it gets too warm. Here in California, it gets hot. In a lot of areas it gets hot. So as a dog trainer, we live our life with getting up in the morning and doing our training as soon as we can to beat the heat. And then you put the dogs away and you swell through the heat for the day, and you start coming out in the evening when it starts to cool down, and then you do more sessions in the evening. So it's usually morning and evening that we work our dogs. During the day, we're pretty much just going into the kennels and scooping and making sure they got water and keeping an eye on them and doing that sort of thing. So that's the evolution of me and how I got started in the training field, and how I paid my dues to get where I'm at, right? And it's important that you understand where these kids learned their trade. How did they get their accreditation? You know, how long have they been training dogs? You know, can you give me 3 or 4 referrals that I can call these folks and ask them how they did with you, that kind of thing. And those that are good are going to have that. You know, they're going to say, oh, not a problem. You know, and they may have even a list that they always give to their customers to call these people to ask them, how did Mark do for you? Did he do a good job? Did he produce a product? Did he solve your problem? I mean, that's the most important thing, that you're paying whoever you're going to pay to do training. It's not just teaching heel, sit down, stay. It's a matter, will this person follow through and do the job he's got to do to produce a product that you're paying for, right? And if they're not, if it's their character to be lazy or to have a lifestyle that's just too hectic that they're not getting the job done, and your dog sits fallow back in the kennel or, you know what I mean, in the situation for an in board or in kennel, then that's not doing you a service, right? So you need to really follow through and understand that that's part of it. Otherwise, you don't get back a product. You get back a lot of this and you end up just pissing your money away. And I've said that before about the aspect of what I need out of my customer. I got to get my customer to put the energy in to work with me. If they don't, they piss their money away because those behaviors will just come right back. Because the dog is a product of two things, environment and breeding, right? And that environment is the owner, right? And you need to educate them the best you can, but you got to get them out there working that dog. And if they don't, they piss their money away. And there's a certain point that all I can do is give my little lecture format that I tell them all this when I sell my product, right? When I sell my services, I'm telling them all this on purpose. I want them to know this so that when they get to the end of the training, if they don't follow up and keep having me come out for lessons and keep on top of it and get off the couch, that they already understand that that's their fault. It's not on me. I've given them everything I can to push them into getting into classes and doing what they need to do. If they don't follow through with it, hey, not my fault, right? But I know in my heart I've done my job. All right, so that's about it. I'll go ahead and let you guys go. You kind of have a better understanding of how I got my career going. And if you're a young person wanting to get into the trade, my biggest advice is mentor under somebody. Go out and poop some scoops. Spend a year, 2 years doing this under somebody else, and then hang your shingle out. Or go to a school like Michael Ellis and pay major dollars and do that, and then that'll be a big start for you. I'll have a lot of respect for you with that, and an admiration and envy, because I'd love to go to a school like that. Even now with the experience I have would be a hoot, you know, to be able to. I think Michael's got professionals he's got in there giving classes that are following his format, and he's got in there as special people working with some of these people. I think Forrest Mickey works for him and does some classes, and you'll have other people that he respects that come in and do certain classes. There's a girl that he has doing nose work for him right now that's one of the top nose work trainers in the industry, and she cut her teeth on where she's at doing that. So we all have our little stories. Everybody kind of gets into it in different ways, but remember my biggest emphasis: pay your dues. Understand, you need to work at this. If you just go out and hang out a shingle and you're going to try to bluff your way through it and fake it to make it, as they say, you're going to end up just going down the tubes. It's only going to be a matter of time until the reality and the truth comes to bear on you, because you don't have the experience that you need to really make it go. All you are is trying to fake it to make it until you do make it, or you don't. So, Mark Ferrasci, ProTech Dog Training, with a little bit of a philosophy for you. You have a good day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.